Ed, how you doing? It's great to have you to get a chance to speak with you again.
No,
So,
thank you for having me.
you have worked in IP in the UK for several years. How is the current COVID-19 situation impacting the IP sector in general, and what are the major changes you've seen in the last few months?
Well, of course, it's so interesting. I mean, this whole thing has affected all of us in every industry, in every walk of life, in every country. It's quite incredible. I don't think we've ever seen anything like it. Aspects of it remind me of the financial crisis in 2008, 9, 10, but almost amplified because, that was just an economic thing. This is health and everything. So we had a relatively short period when lockdown first started in the UK of real uncertainty because our clients didn't know where this was heading for them. We didn't know where this was heading for us. In the very early days, the government hadn't yet stepped in with any of the employment and business support things that they now have been doing. And so there was a real sort of almost, universal sharp intake of breath of what's going to happen. But actually quite quickly, that wore off. I think the panic wore off for a lot of people relatively quickly. And we sort of made a transition to what we probably now regard as normal working quite quickly. So work picked up nicely. Our working patterns, well, we all moved to working from home, of course, like people in many sectors, but it seems to work. It seems to work very well, actually, working from home. We've been as productive individually and collectively as before. So in terms of the overall picture, it's not as bad as we thought it would be. In fact, it's a lot better than we thought it would be.
So, Ed, there's been a lot of uncertainty from when COVID-19 started, but now we're in the beginning of July. We have a few months in already. Have you seen that people in the economy and your clients are feeling a little bit more certain, or are they sort of getting used to the uncertainty and being a little flexible and patient about what their next moves are going to be?
That's a really interesting question. I'd say it varies almost on a client-by-client basis. I mean, we're so lucky in this area to be right at the leading edge of some of this development in terms of technology and even just changing the shape of the way businesses operate. So we've had actually a lot of people coming to us saying, either existing clients or new clients saying, this is the new thing that we've adapted or we've developed during this lockdown period to address issues that might be around coronavirus. We've got clients in the alcohol industry, for example, who've pivoted to hand sanitizers, almost overnight. So, there's a lot of that sort of thing going on.
So you've seen many companies shifting their strategy during this time?
Yes, absolutely. Shifting strategy and developing products, maybe within their existing sector, but also maybe in neighboring areas as well. So one of our clients has developed hand sanitizing stations for office buildings, for example. And I spoke to a potential new client just yesterday about another completely different area, but in the same sort of mindset of making offices and public spaces safer for people to come back to when we start to come back to places. So I guess to answer your question, some have retrenched a little bit, some have expanded into completely new areas. some, as you say, have dealt with knowing that uncertainty is going to carry on, and some have just thrived. I mean, we've got an online retailer as a client, and the chap said to me, it's Christmas every day for us at the moment.
Wow.
You know, people have switched en masse to online shopping in a way that, you know, the scale is unprecedented. So I guess some people are benefiting hugely from this.
So, as a senior patent attorney at IP21, you represent many clients in relation to a wide range of technologies, mechanical, electronic, and medical devices, to name a few. Have you seen the COVID-19 situation impacting a specific sector over others?
I would say, in terms of different sectors, it's difficult to say one sector's been affected more than another. I would say clients in general are being more organized, or trying to be more organized about their costs, trying to anticipate what might be coming ahead. So rather than saying, we're not going to spend any money at the moment, or not going to invest, they're saying, what are we looking at over the next 2 to 3 years horizon in terms of stages, what's involved at each stage, which actually plays quite nicely to the model that we run at IP21. It doesn't sound too much like a sales pitch, but what we try and give people accurate estimates. We try and be very clear about what costs are upcoming anyway. We're not a classic law firm in that respect. You know, our clients don't get invoices with 6-minute units of time accounted for in that traditional way. So we're actually well placed for the reinforcement of that mindset of structure and clarity on costs. And clients, as I say, we've been doing that anyway, but clients really appreciate knowing that, you know, that upper limit, or that, you know, that ballpark figure for things. So it isn't that one industry is cutting back and another industry is not cutting back. It's that I think all clients are equally being more conscious as to what they're getting out of their IP portfolio, what it's costing them, etc.
So working a lot with startups, what would you say this impact has happened in the innovation coming out with some of your clients in the UK in general? Like, what sort of impact have you seen, and what would you expect in the future?
Well, one of the things that we've heard about from wider sources, and we've heard, you know, people talk about, is that the you know, the early stage funding of startups seems to be more challenging now. And if you look at the discussions that are had around that sector, you hear people saying that investors want to meet physically the people they're going to invest in. So clearly that's problematic at the moment. I think clearly investors in general, you know, are cautious about what they're investing in. You know, is this the time for a new gadget, for example, or is this a time for people to invest in something a bit more practical? Who knows? So I think overall, probably that startup funding has lessened, or in London particularly was having a bit of a startup boom before we came into coronavirus. So it might be that boom has lessened a little bit. But there are replacements to this. So there are plenty of funding organisations here in London and the UK in general who are trying to replace some of that capital investment. So it isn't totally hopeless. You know, the investment hasn't vanished completely, but maybe it's coming from slightly different sources than it was before. So I think there are reasons to be optimistic.
So Ed, have you seen with some of your clients dealing with mature companies, some of them larger, you know, Fortune 500, and some smaller, Have you seen this may be an advantage for some of the smaller companies to be a little bit more nimble and change their business model as opposed to some of the larger companies, during a crisis it may be more difficult to veer off such a large operation?
I guess so. I mean, I can't say that directly my client base, I can compare one client with another on that front. Although I've mentioned, one client that I work with who's definitely pivoted towards more, new products which are related to coronavirus prevention, etc., in this whole period, and has moved very quickly. They're a smallish company. But in general, yes, I think smaller companies generally are said to be more nimble and more able to pivot and change. Large companies might have huge overheads in terms of office space and large numbers of staff, and changing direction is much more difficult, I guess. Almost automatically for a large organization. One of the advantages that small businesses have is they may not be locked into huge long leases in expensive city centre buildings and that sort of thing. We actually do work with a couple of startup accelerator type organizations, and of course they have some space that they rent out to startups, but it's all very flexible. So the startups can take a desk or take 10 desks or drop back down to 3 desks or whatever.
And being with the situation the past couple of months, some clients or startups may not be able to get the funding. Have you seen this open up an opportunity for potential of buying or licensing different patents with different companies? Have you seen that marketplace having an upswing?
That's a really interesting question. I think the answer is probably yes. And licensing is an area that's really interesting in IP, because I think it's underutilized. I think firms like to keep hold of their IP because there's a sort of sense of, we developed this and therefore we should hold it tight. But of course, licensing can be a really important revenue generator for IP holders. You only have to look at the children's cartoon merchandise industry to see how profitable it can be for some people. But I think the wider question of utilizing IP assets to raise money, whether that's through licensing or sale or distressed assets, is a really interesting one. And I think we'll probably see more of that as we go through this. I mean, this isn't just a health crisis, is it? It's, there's going to be long-term economic impact on all of us. So unfortunately, there probably will be businesses that don't do so well by the end of it. And those businesses will have their own IP. So that people should definitely be thinking about, first of all, what IP assets they do have already that they can utilize to maybe raise more funding for themselves, or licensing revenue. And on the flip side, investors should be looking at what IP assets a potential investment business already has in it. It's a huge area.
Typically, from what I understand, the businesses, when they're running, they're dealing with so many things, just their day-to-day stuff. It seems that maybe this created like sort of a stop and a little bit of a pivot for companies. Have you seen the companies start realizing, hey, maybe there's more IP there are some more intellectual property that we do own, and maybe we can file and maybe add stuff that they didn't even understand that they had. But now with the situation, they're noticing, a little bit more.
I'm not sure that that's necessarily been a step change due to coronavirus itself, but it's certainly something that we've seen develop over a period. IP21 is one of the few patent attorney and trademark attorney firms in the UK that actually puts a value on IP assets for companies. That's a service that we offer. And that has over time been increasing in popularity because people like to know what they've invested in and whether it's been a good investment. It's an internal feedback mechanism, but also for potential investment and takeovers and licensing. But I wouldn't say it's changing massively because of coronavirus. I would say it was changing over time at a steady pace rather than a step change from our perspective.
So you had mentioned something a little interesting to me. You're saying, from what I understood, you guys do sort of an appraisal for intellectual property to see its value. Are you doing that in order for investors to, create those assets and to understand, hey, this company may be worth this amount of money because of its assets? Or are you doing it more because of, mergers or licensing and things like that?
All of the above, really. I mean, individual clients will have their own needs, and we will tailor the report on those IP assets. Although, of course, we try to keep it separate from anything that they're trying to do strategically. So we won't want to know why the client wants to have its IP assets valued, because we don't want that to influence what our outcome number is.
Yeah.
So we don't ask them whether they want that number to be high or low, for example. We're very careful to keep that at arm's length when we do that work. But the clients want to know that information for all of those reasons that you've given. Traditionally, and I don't know how it works in other countries, but traditionally, IP assets have been put on companies' balance sheets at very low values, even though they might be key to a crucial product that the company might sell. So there is a long-term challenge from businesses not valuing their IP correctly.
Yeah. So with such a drastic situation like COVID-19, have you seen, like, let's say you did an appraisal 4 or 5 months ago, or an evaluation 4 or 5 months ago of a patent asset? Would you say this may have totally been changed because of the situation, and in like some sectors it just like skyrocketed and others it plummeted?
Well, I guess in the bigger picture, yes, that would make sense, because after all, an asset is only worth in the end what someone will pay for it. And so if their particular industry or market has suffered, then clearly that's going to affect things. But what we try and do is give a range of values anyway. So we would never say this patent is worth this many pounds or dollars. We would say, we think that on balance, it's somewhere between these two numbers. So maybe then it would be at the lower end or the higher end of that range, given market fluctuations. But I think the detail that we would base our estimations on hasn't really changed, because we're looking at other factors other than markets, if that makes sense. It's difficult to describe without telling you what the formula is, which obviously I can't do.
If you had, let's say, you've been in the field for a very long time, you get to talk to a lot of people in many different countries, around the world, innovators. What would anything positive you can say will come out of this? If, let's say, you had 30 seconds, to tell the world what Ed Clarke would tell the world, what should they be expecting moving forward?
Well, that's a really good question. So innovation that's a human trait. That's one of the things that we've been really good at forever, is innovation. This is why we're all here. We can see that people are innovating all the time in spite of this, or in the face of this crisis. Or you only have to look at the pharma industry developing these vaccines in record time. We see as practitioners people coming to us with innovation to deal with some of this crisis directly. I've mentioned that already. A couple of our clients have been developing products and moving forward within just in coronavirus. I think business practices have changed a little bit in terms of working flexibly, working more productively, being more open to change in practices. So I'm optimistic that once the economic and health storm has settled a little, we'll be as innovative, as productive, more so than before, with the experience that we've all gained from this terrible, terrible thing that's happened to all of us.